In this lecture, we'll survey the cultural context for posthumanism and post-theory, rethinking humans and rethinking thinking in preparation for discussions of Donna Haraway's Manifesto for Cyborgs, Timothy Morton's The Ecological Thought, Susan Sontag's Against Interpretation, and Stanley Fish's Is There a Text in This Class? Our goal, ever always in the humanities, is to study what it means to be human. We can dress this upways, sideways, and down in a number of ways, saying we're examining the expressions and experiences of human behaviors, ideologies, and artifacts, but when it comes down to it, the humanities are simply driven by humanist impulses to be a good person and live well. But what does this mean? Most of all, what does it mean to be human? I wish we could have this conversation in person, because it's a lot more that way, but let's try to duplicate the dialogue here. The question we're asking is not what makes a human in a physiological sense, bipedal with prehensile thumbs and a large cranium, but a philosophical one. Let's begin, for instance, with a simpler, smaller question. What distinguishes us from animals? Why have humans clung for so long to the belief that we are special? For over 2 millennia, the two most prevalent humanist identifying features used in Western thought to distinguish humans from animals are language and reason. From Aristotle to René Descartes and Martin Heidegger, from classical antiquity to the 20th century, our big thinkers have argued that it is rationality and a capacity for speech that separates humans from non-human animals. We can already see the anthropocentric fallacy in this thinking. Animals most certainly think and speak, even if it is not through our language that they're speaking and thinking. Beyond looking to our own pets to see how they communicate with us, to tell us they're sad, hungry, playful, loving, etc., or how they problem solve toys, games, and traps, there have been numerous studies of various different animal species, from parrots and crows to chimpanzees, gorillas, elephants, octopi, and more, to show startling levels of intelligence, empathy, and a capacity for language. Now, this is where our theoretical game begins. If we are to entertain this idea that things like language and an ability to reason are what distinguishes us as humans, then what's to stop us from saying someone who is mute or someone who has a mental illness is not human? That seems ridiculous, but in fact, to our horror, if we look back not so far in our own history, we'll realize that these exact arguments have been used in the past to denigrate certain peoples, especially the disabled, as less worthy of rights to property, voting, reproduction, and life. Think, for instance, of the early 20th century eugenics movement or the Holocaust. Thus, in short order, most of us will admit that little beyond our physiological makeup distinguishes humans from animals. After all, humans are animals. This perhaps isn't a revelation necessarily for us today, but it is key for us to understand that a paradigm shift occurred in our history of Western thinking from anthropocentrism to ecocentrism, propelling the move from a humanist or human-centered system of thought to posthumanism, or a new kind of humanism that asks to redefine what it means to be human and what humankind's place is in the world. Distinguishing ourselves from animals was the first question of order for philosophers, scientists, and poets transitioning from periods of the pre-modern to modern. Recall Descartes' dualism, for instance, or the belief that humans are comprised not just of their mechanical physiology, but of a soul, or mind. Descartes argued that only humans could have a soul, whereas animals were simply fleshy machines. Here we see evidence of both the pre-modern belief in something immaterial and spiritual, as well as the modern investigation of something material and corporeal, mind and body. Descartes' dualism is actually the perfect starting place for us to see how humanism began to unravel into posthumanism, because it is through such arguments as Descartes' that we see the question of what distinguishes humans is not one that we consider only in relation to animals, but also in relation to machines. In other words, it might be easy for most of us to accept that we're not so different from animals, but to add a second post-human layer to this, we must ask what makes us different from machines. Are we different? And are we prepared for an answer that says that we're not? As mentioned, Descartes paved the way for the argument that humans are just machines. Complex machines, but machines nonetheless. When we think about it, this makes some sense. Our bodies are composed of many simple machines. Our teeth are wedges, our elbows, levers, our legs, pulleys. Some of the first modern science conceptions of human anatomy were birthed in mechanical terms. Those like Joseph Priestley and Antoine Lavoisier conceptualized lungs as combustion machines, and the eye is basically a model for cameras. But let's walk ourselves through a thought experiment. The question for this thought experiment is essentially the same as the one with which we began this lecture. What makes you human? Or to keep us focused, what makes you you. Consider the following. If someone were to replace your leg with a prosthetic leg, would you still be you? Most people would say yes. How about if someone were to replace your lungs with a prosthetic lung? Most would still say yes. Now, what if we replaced your heart with a prosthetic heart? This is where we might start to lose some people. The infallible, constant, steely ring of a prosthetic heart has been marveled at for not quite yet duplicating the tics and imperfections of a human heart racing in fear, love, or excitement, dulled to the contented tick of happiness. But let's, for the sake of argumentation, say we can fabricate a prosthetic heart that is as complex as the ones in our chests, that can duplicate the dynamic rhythms of our everyday lives. It can quicken and slow down. If so, then probably most of you would still say, okay, I'm still me. But the one replacement that typically seems to be the most problematic when I pose this thought experiment in class is, would you still be you if we replaced your brain with a prosthetic brain? So let's clarify our framework for this. Like the heart, our brain is complex. Our theoretical prosthetic brain will likewise be just as complex. We will upload all of your prior memories, and from here you will be able to function as you did before when you had a fleshly brain. Just now you have a synthetic one. Are you still you? To think this through, we have to concede that we've come far in the studies of not just the mind, but of the brain in neurology and neuroscience, as predicted by Descartes' mind-body problem, which first began the discussion of what counts as mind and what counts as body, what counts as this immaterial, unknown thing, and what counts as the material known. The brain is no longer a bastion of our mysterious human essence. It's increasingly becoming mapped and reduced as an, albeit complex, material component of our biological systems. In my experience, while some of us will be willing to accept a prosthetic brain without feeling that it challenges our essential humanness, others will not, usually due to a soul argument, or the argument that there is something inexplicable about each of us that makes us us. Very well. Let's continue with the premise that some accept they are still who they are still human, if they take on a prosthetic brain, and let's follow this through. What's to stop us from replacing every part of your body with something mechanical? You are now entirely synthetic. Are you still you? Are you still human? Maybe you might feel like a full roboticization of your body means you will no longer interact with your environment as you had with your fleshly body. So what if I can promise that your new mechanical body can rebuild and deteriorate like a real human body's? Again, we're talking really advanced, complex machine work, but given this premise, then, we might admit that there is no difference between humans and machines. This is one way we can get to the concept of cyborgs. But first, let's be sure we're all on the same page about what is a cyborg. The term cyborg is a neologism combining the words cybernetics and organism to indicate a cybernetic organism. What is cybernetics? Cybernetics refers to the technologies of control and communication for animals and machines. The term cybernetics was coined by Norbert Wiener in 1948 and is used to explore the idea that the human mind is nothing but information, and thus as nothing but information, it can be separated from the body and uploaded to some other piece of hardware. Again, let's back up. How did we get from defining humans as soul or body as machine to mind as information? This is a slightly different strain of thought from the what defines human question. It's a more broad, general what defines matter or material question. So if we go back to classical antiquity, this is when things used to be defined just by their essence, as in water is water, ice is ice. They're two completely different things. That was the belief. Then there's some transitioning through the modern period, and by the time we get to the end of the 19th century, we're able to codify the physical laws that allow us to explain how water and ice, for instance, are the same matter but just in different states of energy. This is because by the late 19th century, we're starting to articulate the laws of thermodynamics. There is ordered energy and disordered energy, or entropy. Your body is healthy as long as it can properly organize itself. Good things come inside, bad things are expelled, and it is when your body is disordered that death and decay approach. But then we get to the early 20th century, and rather than see all things as matter in different states of energy, we're starting to emphasize the importance of processes and systems. You've seen this in some of our readings, defining author as function, for instance, or text as the result of interpretive processes. For our bodies, when you eat food, that food is not just protein or carb, it's not just energy, but information that instructs your body to do this or that with this material. I am protein, build with me. I am carb, burn or store me. Unfriendly bacteria and viruses that come in are likewise packets of information that signal your body to react in certain ways. If we think about the way we understand our brains now, as a network of electric and chemical signals, thinking of ourselves in terms of information makes a lot of sense. This means then that our bodies are the mere mechanical systems that facilitate our information exchange. So we've completely obliterated what counts as mind, no longer just soul or rational thinking, but information. Now we must ask what counts as body. Do we stop with our fleshly self? We can't, because we already admitted earlier that if we replaced certain parts of our bodies with prosthetics, it would still be a part of us. The prosthetics would be us, because they facilitate our information control and communication with our environment. Let's tackle this from another perspective. The textbook example of cybernetics is a blind man's cane. The cane facilitates the man's information control and communication with his environment. Therefore, the cane is a part of him, just as his eyes would be considered a part of him. Since this man is both organism and technology, body and cane, he is cyborg, cybernetics, and organism. Now consider, we are all cyborg. Like the blind man with a cane, we are all facilitated by analog and digital technologies all around us. Do you wear glasses or contacts? That's a technology, a tool that facilitates action, that enables you to control and communicate information. You are cyborg. Do you have a cell phone? It's your memory bank, remembering all your friends and families and annoying one-time acquaintances, numbers, emails, and pictures. It's part of your brain. You are cyborg. I can go on. Do you have a wallet? Do you ride a bike? Do you have an Instagram account? All ways that we are cyborgs. The point of a cyborg is not to be machine. We are not RoboCop or the Terminator or Bicentennial Man or iRobot or Judge Dredd or Blade Runner or the Borg or whatever. There's a reason why there are so many of these AI thrillers in the 80s and 90s, but that's a talk for another time. Instead, the point of being cyborg is to have a means for redefining our sense of self, to blur our boundaries. The anthropocentrism of classical antiquity, medievalism, and the Renaissance, the scientific optimism of the Enlightenment, and the colonialism of the imperial age all taught us one thing over and over and over again. The self is defensible. Maintain that bodily equilibrium. That was the message of humoral theory in classical antiquity. Protect your body as the temple for your soul. That was the message of medievalism. Define you, yourself, as a civic individual. This is the Renaissance, the beginning of modern humanism, which includes the Enlightenment period. And defend yourself against alien forces and ideas. That's imperialism. But our bodies are not singular defensible units. We like to think of ourselves as simply me. I am Adam, or I am Jane. But we've talked before in this class about how fragile these senses of selves already are to outside influences, to interpolation, for instance. Now we're pointing out that our selves, our bodies, are networks, worlds upon worlds of cellular organisms thriving inside, sustaining and manipulating us. Did you know there are gut bacteria that influence our cravings, for instance, for sugar? We don't need it, they do. Rabies. Why do the rabid seem to fear water? If someone with rabies could swallow their saliva, they would greatly reduce the chances of viral transmission to another because the virus multiplies in the salivary glands. The virus makes it painful to swallow. You are being manipulated. Again, we're not the single entities that we think we are, and it's not always so scary as sugar-mongering gut bacteria and the rabies virus. You've learned in your classes just how many different kinds of friendly bacteria have nestled in the ecosystem of your body. Our edges are fuzzy and blend into our environments. That's what it means to be a cyborg. Posthumanism redefines what it means to be human by considering us from these ecological perspectives, and I say this term ecological pointedly, not just to refer to our natural environments, but our artificial and imagined ones. That includes everything of the natural earth, planets, animals, rocks, microorganisms, etc., everything beyond the earth, space and planetary bodies, everything man-made, clothes, buildings, highways, cars, computers, TVs, ads, etc., and just as importantly, everything ideological and virtual, religions, philosophies, schooling, cyberculture, cyberspaces, online and games and memes, etc. Everything is interconnected. Everything impacts all other things. In Jean-Francois Lyotard's Postmodern Condition, published in 1979, he gives a beautiful metaphor for conceptualizing this. Ripples in a pond. They crosshatch and bounce back and undercut each other. Imagine the world, the natural and artificial, material and immaterial, vast and microscopic, as so many ripples, some bigger, some smaller, but all gliding into each other, all interconnected. To close our content for the semester then, before we get to our presentations, we have one final theoretical question. To interpret or to not interpret? What a loaded question, but it's actually the question we began our semester with, though it seems to have grown from our initial encounters in classical criticism. The original question then appeared as, what is art? What is literature? You're going to get two completely different perspectives on this from Susan Sontag and Stanley Fish. As you read them, keep in mind what we've covered this semester. the theories about the importance of language creating yet screening us from our realities, the concepts of objectivity and subjectivity, and now the interconnectedness of not just physical realities, but imagined realities as well. To be clear, the premise we have to unearth in answering this question, to interpret or to not interpret, is what do we consider real and true, with lowercase or uppercase r's and t's? Are the dangers and disadvantages of interpretation worthwhile? Are you, as reader or author, connected in a community that establishes or reflects these realities? So, what is art and what is literature has become what are we interpreting? Suddenly, there is no text proper, but reality has become our art. And honestly, I encourage you to consider it this way, that interpretive impulse in art and criticism is part of what makes being human worthwhile.